Thank you all so much for coming. I'm Megan. I'm the Water Conservation Specialist here at the Alameda County Water District. And I'll just do some housekeeping introductions, talk a little bit about ACWD, and then introduce our fabulous speaker, Pacita. And we'll do the first portion of the presentation and stop for a break and have light refreshments, and come back for the second portion a little more hands-on, and finish with a raffle for some of these awesome plants. So thank you all for signing in. Did anyone not get signed in? Okay, yeah, I think we got you. So everyone signed in. That's awesome. Restrooms are just out these doors and to the left. We unfortunately can't have any food or drink in this room, so just water, and please be mindful of that during the break when the refreshments happen. Just keep it out into the lobby. We are trying to promote and do these events a little bit more green and less waste, so we do have a special giveaway item for anyone that brought their own cup or a mug that doesn't need to borrow a plastic cup. So if you miss out on it this time, please in the future be mindful of that and try and bring your own mug or anything like that. Yeah, no, and we're trying to move into this space, and so we've got some compost bins, so when you're getting rid of your trash, there's a little bit of a demonstration on what can go in and what can't, and it'll actually be more exciting next workshop on May 18th with compost specifically, because we're having our topic soil, compost, and mulch. So that'll be May 18th, and that will be the next workshop at ACWD. I mentioned the raffle at the end. We have short evaluations for you to fill out, which will enter you into the raffle, so please stick around for that. We have a variety of materials from ACWD, and Pacita also brought some in the back table if you missed it. We have a demonstration garden. It's finally getting warm and everything's blooming, so be sure to come back and check out our front. It's a good demonstration of what you can do with natives and drought-tolerant species. We've designed a few different things, including like a storm swale for commercial and residential applications. Please silence your cell phones. And I just want to share with you a few upcoming events we have. I mentioned the workshop on May 18th. On April 28th and April 20th, there's two Earth Day events. The first one on the 20th is at Washington Hospital, sponsored by the City of Fremont. And the one on the 28th is at the Leaf Center. So ACWD will be there. We encourage you to come out for that. And finally, how many of you guys are ACWD customers? Nice. Okay, so we just increased a bill credit, and if you apply for a certain income level, you can get $25 off your bill. It used to be $20, so we've raised it to $25. I just want to give a little shout out to that program. If you feel like you're eligible, you can inquire and get more information about saving money on your bill. So I'll just do a quick, I'm going to go through these really quickly, but just a little bit of background on ACWD. Our mission is to provide a reliable supply of affordable water. We were founded in 1914, and we have over 84,000 connections of tapping into our pipes, and we serve 356,000 customers. So this is our service area here. It's 100 square miles, predominantly Union City, Fremont, and Newark, although there are some Hayward areas. If you're curious about where we get our water, it's these three supplies. The State Water Project, that's a statewide contractor. We're part of like 17 other agencies that pull water from that source. The San Francisco Public Utilities Commission and the Alameda Creek Watershed and Runoff is our main supply or one of the main supplies at 40%. We have a variety of programs to help you guys out. The one I want to highlight today is our rain barrel rebate. Especially with all these rains, you know, a lot of it just goes straight into the storm drain. These rain barrel rebates will help you capture that and apply it to your garden when it's not raining, and we give up to $50 per rain barrel rebate for that. We are partnering with BOSCA for this event, which is the agency that it unifies all the people that buy water from San Francisco Public Utilities. There's 26 member agencies that all buy water from SF, and they serve over 1.7 million people. Today, our class objectives are to emphasize outdoor water use as a huge opportunity for water conservation, and outdoor water use reduction through the use of water-efficient plants and innovative techniques that can help conserve water and ensure water supply reliability. Just a quick disclaimer. Does anyone have questions for me before I hand it over? All right. So Pacita is a master gardener trained all over the world, so she brings really unique perspective on not only California and native plants, but drought-tolerant species all over the globe. And she has interest in sustainable gardening and drought-tolerant plants. So let's give a warm welcome to Pacita.
I do gardening. Is that working now?
Can you guys hear okay?
You can hear okay? Okay. Whoop.
There we go.
Okay. So the title of my talk is Designing Native and Drought-Tolerant Gardens. Learn how to create a beautiful, low-maintenance and low-water landscape with native and other water-wise plants from around the world. Discover how and why they need less water, and how to plant and care for them. This class will also cover, obviously, correct watering, soil care, plant selection, and basic garden design. There's actually a lot to fit into this topic, and because I want to share everything that I know. So if you wouldn't mind waiting with your questions to the end of a segment, because I might already cover it, intend to cover it in that segment. Okay, so let's get started. So just so you know how it's going to go this evening, I'll give a portion of the presentation till about 7:15, I'm told. Then we'll have a quick refreshment break, and then we'll cover the design portion and hopefully have time for a planting and pruning demonstration as well as the giveaways. Okay, so a little about me. I'm originally from Australia, and I've lived in many different parts of the USA and Canada. We moved to California from the East Coast. Anyone else here from outside of California? Where are you from? Okay, so you'll identify with me when I say that the summers over there are quite a lot hotter and more humid than we have here in California. The winters are cold, frigid, quite the extremes in temperature with ample rain throughout the year. One day my husband came home from work and said, "How would you like to move to California?" Well, of course I said yes. But as I started to think about it, I'd spent the last 7 years developing my garden in Pennsylvania, and I didn't want to leave it behind. So I called the USDA and asked them, what can I do? And they said, as long as I don't bring any soil or any crops, California crops like citrus, and of course we weren't growing citrus on the East Coast. So I dug up. We actually moved December 23rd, so it was prime time for the dormant season for digging up perennials or washing off the soil, and brought them, yes, along in my suitcase. That gives you an example. It just illustrates I'm a bit of a plant fanatic. I love my garden. So most people ask, well, what did you bring? This is a beautiful daylily that I traded with my neighbor. It's a designer daylily. And you can see in the background all these lovely, my little thingy's not working, but in the background you'll see thirsty hydrangeas. There's a huge rhododendron. It was like 12 feet tall. We don't get them that tall here because there's not enough water. There's maples, all high water use plants. This is a beautiful clematis, and check the beautiful expanse of lush lawn on my half-acre property. And I didn't have an irrigation system. Everybody say, ah. Whoops. Okay, is that okay? So how did they do? I bet you all want to know, right? Well, with lots of tender loving care and water that you give to establish new plants, they did really well initially. And then as I started to wean them off that care, there were some casualties, especially when the drought hit and I had to reduce my watering by half. And then I had a light bulb moment. As much as I wanted to bring my whole Pennsylvania garden with me to California, I couldn't. And not just because I couldn't fit them in my suitcase. As you all know, California is different. It's sunny year-round, which is wonderful, and that's why everybody wants to move here. But it comes with its own challenges. Dry summers and frost, low rainfall, and different climate zones depending on where you live, even different microclimates within your own property. Thank you all acknowledging that. So the truth is you can grow just about anything here in California, but it will take a lot of time, energy, and money, and water, all of which we don't have. What I learned is that a big part of being a successful gardener in California, well actually all over, is paying attention to climate and local conditions and using plants that are adapted to those conditions. It follows maintenance practices that support the goals of conserving resources and reducing waste, and that's what we call sustainable gardening. None of this was raised in my Master Gardener training on the East Coast. The good news is that you don't have to do a complete overhaul of your garden to make some headway into conserving resources and water, and you don't have to sacrifice beauty. See, no way. We don't want to sacrifice beauty, but we do care about the environment. So, how do we create a beautiful garden that is also water efficient and low maintenance, you ask? I guess that's why you're all here. So we're going to cover each of these topics. Choose plants that are adapted to your climate and microclimate. Nurture your soil. Water correctly. Use sustainable landscape practices and apply design elements and principles. Okay, a sustainable landscape starts with choosing the right plants for your climate and microclimate. I'm going to say this repeatedly tonight because it's a very, if you can get this concept, you're on a fast track to a successful gardening. Okay. So California shares its unique summer dry climate with only 2% of the world's landmass and in only 4 other regions of the world. We've got central Chile, the Western Cape of Africa, Southwest Australia and South Australia, and the Mediterranean region. And the climate is characterized by short, mild, rainy winters and long, warm to hot, dry summers. Floods or hard freezes in winter and multiple years of drought. Rainfalls vary from year to year, which I'm experiencing in the short time that I've lived in California. And therefore, we need summer irrigation. But we need to also be responsible stewards of our limited resources and in particular water. Okay, so not only are we different, from other places around the world, we also have climate differences within California. And that's caused by latitude, coastal influence, elevation, topography, and orientation to the sun. The folks at Sunset magazine have developed a climate zone system. Are you guys familiar with that? Yeah. Okay, good. I'll speed through this. Sorry?
I said I was raised on it.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, second generation California. We didn't do it.
Okay, that's good. That's interesting because when I, drive around gardens, I'm not seeing a predominance of, drought-tolerant landscaping. So,
most people will say they're not from California, so they don't. You have to show them the book.
okay. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the book, this is the latest book. And what you'll find are maps of regions Okay, so test. What is your sunset climate zone? Anyone else? Okay, so I'll explain that to you. When I hear 9, that sounds to me like the hardiness zone, which is different than the sunset climate zoning. So, it's very hard to see in this map, but if you were to be able to take a close look at this, and you can come up later, or I can pass the book around and you can have a look, but it says that Fremont is zone 17, bordering 16. It's right on the border, but it is within the 17. But it doesn't, it's possible. And it doesn't mean that where you live exactly isn't 16, because as we said before, it varies, right? So the climate zone for Fremont, according to Sunset Magazine, is zone 17 bordering zone 15, and it's called the Northern California Coastal Strip. And it's characterized by wild, I was combining mild and wet. Mild, wet, almost frostless winters, cool summer fog, cool season vegetables do well here. Artichokes, flowers, and wind-tolerant ornamentals thrive. Citrus, hibiscus, gardenias don't get enough heat. Does that sound accurate? Okay, so you might have a variation in microclimate on your property. So this is like the typical characteristics for the zone, but like we said earlier, it varies. We'll just have to write to Sunset Magazine collectively and update their map.
Of course, that summer fog used to exist, and it's going away.
Climate change.
Yeah, I used to grow San Francisco fog tomatoes. Not anymore. They just fly.
Okay.
Grow the short, the more heat tolerant ones.
So what she's talking about is that, when we know what our climate is, we can choose plants that grow well in our environment, which is what we're trying to learn here today. So we talked briefly about microclimates, and these are smaller areas within a climate zone, within the zone, but also within your own property. So for example, and they have unique weather patterns which can greatly influence plant performance. So within your own property, there's shade from trees, or it's hotter reflecting off the driveway or a building structure, and windy areas. So you have to pay attention to the conditions on your property, and someone down the street might be able to grow something and you say, oh, I would like that, but make sure to locate it in an equally, just because you're in the same neighborhood doesn't mean it will grow well on your property. You have to be mindful about that. And in a way you can kind of manipulate the conditions a little bit. So I like to grow succulents, and I don't have a lot of sun, so I make sure that I provide the heat. They're actually on my driveway. I get reflection off the brick wall. So you can kind of, I make sure to avoid low spots where it's colder. They're the kind of things we're talking about. Okay, plant selection for a sustainable garden. So what we recommend is that you choose a diverse plant palette. So I don't know if you've seen a lot of gardens where they sort of have a monoculture of the same plant planted in rows. And that looks nice and orderly, but in terms of diversity, it's not ideal for the landscape, because if something were to happen to that variety of plant, you pretty much wipe out your whole garden. Also, diversity attracts more insects to the garden. More insects, more wildlife, more birds. So if you choose disease-resistant varieties that are well adapted to your climate and microclimate, am I saying this again, guys? You getting the picture here? It is the single most important thing to consider for gardening success. And in our climate, the ideal plant to plant is a California native. But you can also plant drought-tolerant species from those other regions that we mentioned on the map, because they adapted to the same environment. What we want you to do too is avoid invasive species, and I was at the nursery today and I still saw Mexican feathergrass, and that's on the invasive species list. Here you can Google this, but I'll pass it around. There's a list of very popular plants that we recommend that you don't plant because they're considered invasive, and that means it overtakes like our natural flora and it can choke the waterways. It has a lot of negative effects, and on this website you can also, they'll give you alternatives. If you love the look of that, they'll say, okay, you love the look of this grass, try this one, it's not invasive. And usually the invasive species are not native, obviously. You see the pampas grass like overtaking the hillside in some places. You've seen that? Yeah, and that's actually invasive species. Plant for year-round interest. That means, for example, if you're planting a crepe myrtle, it's a good choice in terms of year-round interest, because in the winter you get the beautiful bark. In the summer you get the beautiful flowers. So you've got, and in the early spring you get the leaf color, like red-tipped leaves. So there's something happening all the time. And choose flowering and native plants that attract beneficial insects, native bees, butterflies and birds, to create a bridge to nearby wild areas. So I've put here, and this is on the reference sheet at the back, and I encourage you to take that home. And your homework, if you choose to accept, at the bottom of the screen is about an hour-long video by Doug Tallamy, Restoring Nature's Relationships. It will change your life. If you're not already a proponent of native plants, it will change your life. So I encourage you to look at that. You might already know that native plants are the ones that have developed or adapted, grown up with the native wildlife, birds, etc. So in this video, it shows that a non-native tree, for example, there isn't any food on that tree for our birds. So I encourage you to check that out. So for some reason, the photo's not there. Do we know what's happening?
Is that one?
You want to go back and forth again? Go back again.
Well, there's a really nice picture here. There are two actually, but this is an example of a California native, the seaside buckwheat that attracts the Ikonomou blue butterfly, and it only is attracted to this plant. It has adapted with only this plant. So if we didn't plant this plant, we wouldn't have this butterfly. I hope this doesn't happen again. Okay. So plant selection resources. Today we're going to talk about the new Sunset Western Garden book, which you all are already familiar with. The water use classification of landscape species. Are you guys familiar with that? Okay, good. UC Davis Arboretum All-Stars and calscape.org. And again, that's on the handout. Okay, so sorry? I've got it on the sheet back there. Yeah, you can take that home. So the water use classification of landscape species, otherwise known as WUCLs, classifies, this is actually a University of California collection, it classifies almost 4,000 plants. 4,000 plants. If you can't find a plant there, there's a problem. And it separates the choices into regions. So we are the north central coastal region. Not the desert or seaside, because different plants grow differently in different regions of California. And the classification is based on water use compared to how much water is needed to maintain a large field of cool season grass. That means that cool season grass is considered the most thirsty plant. So that's called 100% water use. There aren't any other plants that need more water than cool season grass. This is why we encourage you to reduce your lawn. It's actually the #1 irrigated crop in the United States and accounts for like 9 billion gallons of water use in the United States. And 50% of our outdoor water use is for watering lawns up to now. We want to change that. Okay, so the Wickle system, they're classified as high water use, and even a plant that is considered high water use uses 70 to 90% of what a lawn does, all the way down to very low, which is less than 10. So even if you chose a medium water use plant, like a camellia, it's using 40 to 60% less water than a lawn. So it's a good reason to convert your lawn. So I find this list very useful in knowing, well, which plants in my landscape that I brought from the East Coast are high water users, and which ones should I consider replacing with low water use plants. And here's a list of some common high water use plants a lot of people have in their landscapes. Birch trees, Tasmanian tree ferns, hibiscus, coastal redwood, annual flowers, and cool season turfgrass. Medium water use, Japanese maple, camellias, citrus, hydrangea, roses. There are some low water use roses, but in general, they're medium. Oh, this is not going to be good if we can't see the pictures. Is there?
He's bringing.
Yeah, I'll try and bring it onto the desktop and see if that works.
Sorry, guys. Technical glitch.
There it is.
No? We might get to see the butterfly now. There it is. Isn't that beautiful? So we were further. I'll click it down. Thank you. Thank you, Megan. Okay. So if you go to the Wickles website, and here is an example. I put in milpetus, and selected very low water use plants, and there are 109 choices of plants that will grow well in milpetus, so that's a good selection. The only problem with this website is that they don't have any pictures, and they don't talk about details about the plant, so it just provides a list. And like I said, it's useful for determining in your property, you know, what to replace potentially. Here are some commonly known very low water use plants: the manzanita, ceanothus, western redbud, the monkey flower, and the coast live oak. Are you all familiar with those plants? Okay. We have some good examples outside, actually. Okay, so I particularly like the UC Arboretum All-Stars because it classifies a manageable 100 plants. And they're actually, they're also based on water use. And you can select if you want a tree, a shrub, a perennial, so the type of plant. And you can go to the UC Arboretum, Davis Arboretum, and actually see all the plants fully grown. So if you think you might like that plant, you can go and check it out. So they have a booklet, and this is all available online, and the 100 plants are actually listed. And there's a picture, it describes growing conditions, how big and how small, etc. Right. So Yeah, but the thing is that, you know, from 4,000 down to 100, they're like the type of plants that will grow well in most places in California. I've selected a lot of these plants from this list, and they're growing very well.
Okay, so they chose them because they grow well in
Yes,
California.
that's correct. That's correct. So if you want to take a look, browse through that, or you can look it up online. As I said, it's on the handout. So how they classify them is, you know, have you ever wondered, well, what do they mean by very low water? Well, what it means is you only need to water once a month during the growing season. And this list includes more than just natives, okay? So even drought-tolerant plants from other areas of the world can benefit from summer irrigation, just once a month. Low water is watering every 2 weeks, and then once a week is medium water, which would be like your camellia or whatever, although camellias are not on this list. Okay, so you would say if I want a small tree that needs full sun, you can click in all the characteristics that you want, and it comes up with a list. And then you can click on each of these ones that you think, oh, that looks kind of nice, and then they give you more detail. So here is the Ceanothus Ray Hartman. I actually have a giveaway of that plant today. And it needs full sun, it's very low water needs, you know, it flowers in spring. It tells you all the information that you need when you're making your plant choices. Here's some examples of very low water use plants. I've got also this Ceanothus to give away as well. And I think you've got a whole bunch of these in the front. The Heuchera, or coral bells. Okay, there are also many beautiful choices for low water use plants from other summer dry climates. So this is plants native to South Africa. As you can see, you can get quite a variety of beautiful, colourful plants, and some of these here are actually South African natives. The leucadendron, in this picture, even a lot of the succulents. Some of you said that you grow succulents. They're also native to South Africa. Plants from the Mediterranean region, olives, artichokes. And I'm not going to read all of this, but just to show you that Greece, you know, from the Mediterranean basin, has over 5,500 different species of plants. So there are a lot of choices there. And this is actually a picture from my garden. It's a low water use plant native to Australia, a Banksia. Do you like that one? Okay, this is also a photo from my yard, and it's combining the Hardenbergia, which is the purple vine, that's native to Australia, the Coprosma in the front, native to New Zealand, and then the Senecio, the string of bananas, is native to South Africa. And in the back, the tall tree is a California live oak. So we're combining, this is my garden, combining plants, drought-tolerant plants from around the world. Okay, so this is a recent discovery for me, calscape.org. Is anybody familiar with that? Oh my gosh, this is an amazing website. So the California Native Plant Society paired with the UC Berkeley Herbarium. Yes, you'll be amazed at this website. You could sit on there for hours and never finish. I don't mean that to be daunting or overwhelming. It's just that there's a wealth of information depending on how far you want to take it. So the wonderful thing is the goal is to help Californians restore nature and save water by showing people which plants are really native to any location in the state. And this is specific to your area. So you plug in Fremont, you plug in Menlo Park, Sunnyvale, and there's plants native to your specific area, you know, based on the type of soil, the amount of precipitation, the exposure, etc., etc. And then they give you resources of where you can go and find them and buy them. So as I mentioned before, California is an extremely environmentally diverse state, and different California native plants evolve to grow in areas of the state with very different temperatures, etc. It's always best to grow California native plants in the areas in which they evolved and naturally belong. They are easier to grow, healthier, and require little or no artificial irrigation. And the gentleman in the beginning of the talk was asking, can I grow a garden without supplemental water? If you use this list and plant those plants specific for that have adapted in your area, the answer is yes. You're happy. This is your friend. This calscape.org is your friend. Okay, so this is an example of what you'll see. I hope you can kind of make it out. But so plants native to California, over 7,000. And that sounds overwhelming, but they classify them for you. You can get the whole list of plants. You can choose trees, plant type, or I can't even read it from here. Whether they need sun or shade, whether you need deer-resistant plants or ground covers, hedges. If you need your bank stabilized, you can select all these criteria, and it'll choose plants specific to your area where you live. I think that's brilliant. And also for water use. And then at the bottom right corner, there's a very easy class of natives. So you might pick for your region, these specific needs, right? But there are some California natives that aren't as fussy. So they can grow where you live, where I live, etc. So they're easier to grow in the landscape. Okay, so if I plugged in Sunnyvale, and we've got 321 plants to choose from. And if you click on one of them, here's an example of California fuchsia. It shows you numerous photos so you know what to expect, how it looks. I'm sorry this is so small, but it tells you how tall and how wide it will grow, right? The form, if it's a spreading or globular or erect, so you know exactly what you can expect from this plant. How many times have you seen people planting like a huge, 30-foot tree like a foot from the window because they haven't checked to see what is the mature size of this plant, and that's really important to know. And this site has all of that. It tells you the growth rate, if you can expect cover, within the next year, or you have to wait a few years for it. What's the dormant season, the type of leaves, when it's flowering, everything you'd want to know about the plant and where you can get it from. So this talks about where you can, it also talks about companion plants, what looks good with that plant. If something sparks interest and you go, oh, I wonder what that would look good with, it's even got that. You can see why you could sit there and just keep searching on it. And there's more. Where you can buy them, how often you need to water them. This particular one is once a month. So how do they do it? How do these California natives survive without water in the summer months? Well, they adopt a number of different mechanisms, and sometimes they use them in combination. And this happens through evolution over millions of years. Growing here, if they can't do it, then that species dies, right? Because in nature, there's no one there watering it. So the three major strategies are drought tolerance, drought avoidance, and desiccation tolerance. It sounds kind of very scientific. So drought tolerance is adaptations like with the leaves. For example, the ceanothus, it's kind of got a waxy, shiny, and that's reflective. So with succulents, for example, anybody here grow succulents? Okay, so you know about the cacti have spines. What do you think? That's an actual drought-tolerant adaptation. What do you think the spines or a fuzzy, furry coating does for drought tolerance? Cuts down on evaporation. So what it does, it actually slows the the travel of wind around the plant, and it traps moist air. So it's a pretty clever adaptation. And a lot of plants have absent or modified leaves, again with, succulent plants. And like some fir trees, small, thin, upright leaves. This is a good example, actually, drought-tolerant plant. The leaves are very fine and upright, and that reduces, because if they're like this, they don't get as much sun as if they're like this, right? So these are all adaptations. And in some pines, there's sunken stomata pits that trap moist air. Do you guys all know about stomata? Okay, so stomata, do you remember when you were in school and you learned about photosynthesis? So the stomata are little holes or little windows on the leaves, and it's through these windows that the gas exchange occurs, like taking in carbon dioxide, releasing oxygen, and I'll show you in the next slide, but remember in photosynthesis, part of the process is the release of water. You need water, so that means evaporation and water loss. So if the stomata, the windows are sort of sunken, there's less evaporation from those windows. It's very clever, don't you think? And also shallow, flat, fleshy roots. Like again with succulents, if you grow succulents, some of them, the roots are only up to 6 inches deep. And that's just to trap even the dew in the morning. Okay, so drought avoidance. You might be familiar with the buckeye, California native. And they're the first to leaf out in the spring because we've had all this rain, and they're also the first to lose their leaves. So in the middle of the summer when it gets really hot, they don't have any leaves. They've dropped them all because that's their avoidance. They're hiding. Even annuals, like now we'll be getting some, California poppies. Yep. Yep. And also the lupines. And what happens when it starts to get too hot? They disappear. They reseed, and that's their mechanism of drought tolerance, is that they reseed, they lie in the soil until the rains come again, and there they go, reproduce. This is the photosynthetic accretion, and this is another mechanism of drought avoidance. It's called crassulation acid metabolism, and a lot of succulents use this. And so what they do, those windows, they close during the day, so there's less evaporation from the sunlight. And they store the carbon dioxide at night. So it's about these windows opening and closing when it's the hottest, so there's less evaporation. So have you ever gone for a walk in the forest and you see like these dried up bits of, like in the summer, and you see these dried up bits of moss? In fact, I've seen it on my roof, my garage roof. And at the moment, they're really green, right? But if you notice in the summer, you hardly notice them because they're avoiding the dry summer. So they almost, dry up until they look like they're dead. But once the rain comes, they're alive again. So that's another mechanism. So a sustainable landscape cares for your soil. Now, there's a bit of science here, so bear with me, but it's really important to understand soil for your gardening success. Soil is a living, dynamic, complex ecosystem. And the ideal soil supporting plant growth is 25% air, like a quarter air, a quarter water, and in the solid phase, 45% minerals, and that comes from degradation of rocks. And then 5% organic matter. And organic matter comes from living organisms, plants and animals that are in various stages of decomposition. The soil mineral particles, which is the rock part, are divided into 3 categories by size. Sand, you're all familiar with this, sand, which you can see with the naked eye, silt, which you need a 10 times microscope to see, and clay. you actually need an electron microscope to see. But you all, I think, recognize the difference between sandy soil and clay soil. Soil texture is the relative proportions of the sand, the silt, and the clay. And it's one of the most important physical properties affecting plant growth. It determines the nutrient and water holding capacity. And does everybody know what type of soil they have? So it's pretty important to know, but are you interested to know how you could figure it out? Yes. Okay. So it's called the subjective field test method. And you get a ball of soil from your garden, you moisten it, and you make a ball, like plasticine or Play-Doh, right? And then you proceed to try to create a ribbon with that ball. If you're able to make a ribbon, remember this in pottery at school? It was a long time ago, I know, for me. If you're able to make a ribbon, that means there's more clay because it sticks together. But imagine if you had very sandy soil. Do you think you'd be able to form a ribbon? No. So that is the test of whether you have sandy or clay soil. It's very subjective, but once you do it, you really get an idea. It's easier than you think, than it sounds. So the important thing here is that coarse texture has more sand and really good aeration, which plants need. But the water goes through very quickly, so they have low water holding capacity. So for a plant that's planted in sandy soil, they need more water and less water to get it wet, but you have to water it more frequently because it pretty much just runs through. But with clay soil, it holds onto the water a lot longer, and it's harder to get it wet. I'll show you in another picture. And the good thing about clay soil, a lot of us say, oh, we've got clay soil, is that it holds nutrients very well. But it can also be so tight that air and water can't infiltrate, which is not a good thing. Okay, so here's a comparative wetting pattern for different soil types. So you've probably heard, oh, you should water your lawn, etc., 1 inch. What does 1 inch mean? I never understand that. But here's an example. So if you have sandy soil and you apply 1 inch of water, you see how the pattern goes deeper and quicker. It penetrates about 12 inches, but it doesn't go very wide. Compared to clay that doesn't go very deep. So if you're watering and you think you're done, roots are hydrophilic. They go to where the water is. Have you ever had a pot plant in your garden and then you find the root of the tree next to it has come up to the watering hole? They love water. So in clay soil, if you've applied your 1 inch, it's only going down 5 inches. What would happen if you had a massive tree whose roots only went down 5 inches? I've seen it, and actually in the East Coast, a huge tree got toppled because our soil was so, the root system was very underdeveloped. So that's why you need to choose plants that are adapted to your soil type, right? Okay, soil structure. Soil particles exist as aggregates. They're little plant particle communities. So we kind of they stick together in groups. And these structures are different sizes and shapes, but it affects the moisture availability and fertility. And so imagine if there's little aggregates, right, little communities, and then you water or you feed or the roots are trying to get through. They kind of get through in between these little aggregates. So it strongly influences plant growth. The good thing is the soil structure in the top growing layer can be changed in one season by climate and enriched with organic matter. So if you think, oh, my soil's terrible, you can change it. Hang on. Not completely, but you can improve the top growing layer by adding organic matter, because in nature, what is the organic matter that is helping our soil? What do we do in our landscapes? What does the mow and blow guy do? Right, in nature, the leaves remain and they decompose, animals die and they decompose and they build up that organic layer. But in our gardens, you know, we blow those leaves away. Well, some of us do. A lot of people do. Okay, so we're almost done with the soil, but this is a really important part. So I wish my little thing worked, but so you see there's a surface layer where, say, for example, the turf grows, but then there's that mineral particles. Oh, is that my? No, it's not.
No, it's not the thing. You're pressing the green thing?
Oh, the green. Oh, the green thing.
There you go.
Okay, no, I was. I told you, that's why I do gardening. Okay, here we go. Thank you. Okay, so here is what's called the A-horizon layer, and that's where crop plants obtain their water and nutrients. It varies in thickness from inches to several feet. So what would you imagine? Would several feet be good for growing plants? Yes, so that's our goal, is to build up that organic humus-rich layer. And that's done by the accumulation of organic matter, and it can be changed in a negative way by climate. So if you have like a huge rainstorm and you haven't protected your soil, you can wash that away. It's also the zone of greatest biological and microbiological activity. So here, soil biology plays a vital role in determining many soil characteristics such as fertility and structure. Healthy soils are full of life as long as we don't blow everything away. So in this, let me finish with this. So the life are earthworms and saprophytes. They're microorganisms that live on the dead and decaying organic matter, and other beneficial soil microorganisms like bacteria and fungi. And actually, have you heard of mycorrhizal fungi? If you've been to other talks, you might have heard about this. So this is one of these type of soil life, fungi, that live in a symbiotic relationship with plant roots. So they actually communicate with one another. The roots say, I need this particular nutrient. No, it's actually true. I need this particular nutrient, and the fungi picks it out of the soil, and they help one another. So this is why we say we have all these, if we're doing the right thing with our soil, and these relationships and communities are happening underground, would we till the soil? Is tilling a good idea? No, because you've just formed these beautiful relationships and connections, and then you come along and separate them. So we actually are not recommending tilling the soil, even with vegetable gardening, unless you're starting for the first time on barren soil. So now even in vegetable gardening, we don't even pull up the plants, we cut them at the base, and then we just put more compost and plant on top of it, because we're maintaining that soil life. And it is life, and all life needs food and water. What would be the food for that life? Organic matter, right? And when we don't pull up those old plants, those roots are organic matter, which is food for the life under there, and we continue it decomposes, right? Any questions about that? So, again, because it's alive, we want to protect it, and we do that with mulch. Mulch, mulch. Did someone mention mulch? Mulch is very important in protecting that soil life, but it also serves quite a long list of functions. Prevents weeds from coming up. It maintains the soil temperature, so we don't get the extremes in temperature from bare soil. Because it protects the soil life, it maintains the soil structure, and the water holding capacity. The list is very long and it's very beneficial. Any questions? Yes.
So, you mentioned avoiding filling. What if, like my kids, I new house, well, old but new for me, and the yard's just like totally weeded out. And I've been sort of watching different videos. Some are saying, okay, get back there, rent a roller tiller, fill that sucker up, get those weeds out. And the
Okay.
other end of the spectrum is to cut the weeds down, lay down cardboard, and then mulch.
Bingo.
That.
Bingo. If it's just a weed problem,
It's a weed problem.
we call that sheet mulching. So Google that. Put UC sheet mulching, and I think Borska also sometimes gives talks on that. But the basic. There's a sheet on the back on that. Thank you. It's pretty simple. You do cut down the weeds to the, mow the weeds down, put compost, a thick layer of cardboard overlapping so the light doesn't get through, and then mulch it. And you actually, because you're protecting the ground, your soil will become fertile. Without, picking up a shovel. Well, you do need the shovel for the mulch, but it's not as heavy as soil. Okay, so soil preferences for California natives. Sorry, this is so much information, but remember that Calscape website that I was so excited about? It actually gives you information on the soil preferences for plants. And like I mentioned earlier, there are also easy to grow category, which can cross different, soil types. And remember that California natives are considered wild, right? So they don't need supplemental feeding apart from just applying compost. So let nature do its thing. In fact, if you actually fed your California natives with plant food, their life would be shortened, and you might even. So. Okay. Yes. Probably. The thing that comes to mind is miner's lettuce. Yeah, and there are actually Borska talks on I give a talk on edibles, but native edibles would mean that they only come up in the rainy season, like the miner's lettuce. So it's limited. So if you have any gardening questions, like this question that you have, you can write to your local Master Gardeners. You can either email, phone, or walk into the office, and each county has one. And they're open certain days of the week. You'd have to Google what's specific to your county. And if you send them pictures and ask any question, they'll look it up for you and try to answer your question. And it's a free service. Yeah, I often work the helpline in Redwood City, and we get people walking in with their branch, and it's actually a fun thing to do. But it's a wonderful resource for you guys. So just Google UC Master Gardener and your county, and all the information will be there. So as Master Gardeners, one of the most frequently asked questions is, how much water do my plants need? How much should I give my water? And much to your annoyance, the answer is invariably, it depends. So what does it depend on? Just put up your hand, shout it out. Think. Sunlight, how much sun it's getting? Soil type? Type of plant? I'll let someone else have a go. Microclimate. There's actually a long list coming up.
Temperature, humidity.
Yes, all those factors. What's growing in my yard in half shade, half sun, and what's growing in your yard in full sun, do you think they're going to have different water requirements, the same plant? Of course they are. What about, variations in the growing season? If the plant is dormant, are they going to need much water? No. Just like when we go for a run, we're going to want more water because we're actively doing something. So when plants are actively growing, are they going to need more water than compared to when they're dormant? Yes. So you can see why we can't answer that question specifically for you, but what I'd like to do here is teach you how to figure that out for yourself. Did you have a question? Okay. So here's the list. It varies depending on temperature, how much sun exposure, the wind, humidity, microclimate, soil type, plant size, plant type, plant establishment. If they're, newly planted plants are going to need more water than established plants. How deep the root system is, and the season. You guys pretty much got all those. Good job. Okay. So how much water do plants need? This is the science. You can tell from that list. So how much water plants need depend on how much water they lose to their environment through evaporation and how much they use in their living process through transpiration. Remember we talked about photosynthesis and they need water to create carbohydrates for their growth? So there's two factors. Evaporation and transpiration equals the evapotranspiration rate. Oh yeah, my training was science. You get that idea. Okay, this is how you're going to figure out how much water to give your plants. How to water correctly establish plants. What you want to do is water the entire root zone at the drip line, not at the trunk or the crown. It's at the, yes?
I do that. Like the plant is growing bigger, and I move the drip system out, and then the plant is very unhappy. Starts losing leaves and all sorts of stuff.
We'll have to talk about that in the break. But you are correct. So we want to apply the water at the drip line because, again, we talk about that plants, are from nature. And if I'm a tree and it rains, where's most of the water going to go? It's going to fall off at my drip, off my branches. So it makes sense that my roots, remember the roots are hydrophilic, they like water. It makes sense that the feeder roots would be where the water's falling off me, which is the drip line. And as plants grow, you plant a plant, this big, and the roots are only this big. So as it grows and the branching gets bigger, you do have to move your irrigation to that drip line. Does that make sense? Yep. You're all doing that already, right?
I once had a plant I had to train. It had been watered right in the trunk all the time. So I don't know, maybe its roots were this way, so I had to slowly train it out.
And you can.
Yeah.
That's correct. Okay, so when we saw from the previous slides, so when you apply water, depending on your soil type, it's going to go down and out, right? So just when you think, oh, I'm just putting my emitters on the drip line, you imagine that it's going to be spreading horizontally and also vertically. Every time you water your plant, you're going to want to water the entire root zone, every time. Every time you water. And so how do you know how deep your roots are? So there's sort of three categories. For leafy vegetables and annuals, like this little guy, they penetrate up to 1 foot deep. So you would only need to water down to 1 foot. For small shrubs, cool season turf grass, tomatoes, large shrubs and trees, warm season turf grass. Oh, hang on, I've got mixed up here. these small shrubs, they go down to about 2 feet, and so do tomatoes actually. The roots of a tomato plant go down as deep as 2 feet. And then you've got large trees which have the feeder roots in about the top 3 to 5 feet of soil. So how do you know if you've penetrated deep enough? So, oh, okay. Sorry, I've gone ahead of myself. Okay, so like I said, water deeply the entire root zone each time you water. Thorough and deep watering encourages roots to grow deeply and protects from heat and dryness. And who waters here like, okay, once a week I'm going to water that plant? My daughter's boyfriend has this app for his indoor plants, and it rings a bell. Like it makes a noise when a week is up. So you all know now that that's not necessarily the best way, because all those conditions vary and the water needs will vary. And it's not like you should water your plant every week. What you should do is water your plants when they need it. So water needs vary. So for example, desert plants, you want to wait for them to dry, like the top 6 inches if they're in the ground, to dry, right, before you water them again. Whereas, thirstier plants, you want to keep them kind of on the moist side, so you would water them more frequently. Does that make sense? So you're going to say, well, what if I have this plant that doesn't need as much water and this plant that does need more water? Well, you're going to put them on a different hydro zone. So, in your watering system, you have different hydro zones, like zone 1 waters this section of my garden. Well, all those plants are going to get the same water, but you want to make sure that those plants all need the same water. Otherwise, you'll be overwatering or underwatering a particular type of plant. Does that make sense? Okay. And if you're watering a tree, a huge tree, it's just like, people, if you're a lot bigger, you're going to need more to fill you up, right? But you might be able to go, the tree will need more water to hydrate it, but it can go for a lot longer because it stores all that water in its roots. Okay, so with trees, the feeder roots can actually extend 2 to 3 times beyond the drip line. So be aware of that. So this is what I was trying to say before. How can you tell that you've watered the entire root zone? You can use one of 2 methods, the moisture meter or a soil probe. You can also use a rebar, a stick of rebar. And so if you stick a rebar in the soil, if it's wet, it will penetrate very easily. But once it hits dry soil, good luck getting that any further. So you'll know how deep you've watered. And I'm not telling you that you have to do this all the time, but just till you get an idea of how much that particular plant, needs in general, right? Get used to it. Has anybody used a moisture meter? What do you think of them?
They last they wear out.
You have to make sure that the stem is clean. Actually save it.
So I have a moisture meter here, and I was actually kind of against them because, I'm a gardener, and I'm like, why do I need these tools? But since I was giving the talk, I thought I should get one. And they're actually fun. They're good for pots. And it comes with like a list of, so for example here, dry, if you had drought tolerant plants, you wouldn't water again until that line got back to dry. If you had ferns, you'd want to keep it on the moist side. So that needle would have to be on the moist side, getting a little bit off the moist side before you water it again. You kind of get the idea of that? It's actually, when you're starting off gardening, it's a useful tool, I think, until you kind of get used to it, and then you use your finger. Okay, sustainable landscape conserves resources by watering efficiently. Everybody's converted to drip, right? Yes? Does anybody want me to go through this slide? You're all proponents of drip irrigation. You might, not be aware that there's a new system. It's getting older now, but they have continuous emitters throughout the tubing, and you can get them at different intervals and different flow rates, and it's a much more even application of water, and it applies water directly to the roots. Okay, sustainable landscape uses integrated pest management. Okay, again we talked about choose a diverse plant palette of disease-resistant plants well adapted to your climate, keep the soil healthy, feed the soil with natural fertilizers like compost, and this encourages slower growth. If you start feeding with, Miracle Grow, it's going to speed up the growth of plants, but in an unnatural way. And then usually for natives especially, like I mentioned earlier, they don't like it. And then it means you're going to have to do more work with pruning. If you let it grow just naturally with the compost, then there's less work for you. We say to encourage natural enemies of pests to live in your garden, avoid pesticides and chemicals which cause runoff in your waterways. Anybody here still using pesticides? You don't? Okay, so the reason that we discourage the use of pesticides, what we encourage is first of all, walk through your garden regularly. Catch any, pests in action early on when they're in low numbers. And we actually say tolerate pests in low numbers because they're food for the beneficial insects, like you're familiar with ladybugs, right? Well, they love aphids. And if you were at the first sighting of aphids this spring on your roses, think, aphids, I need to get rid of them with a spray. What's the ladybug going to eat? They're going to go next door, right? And they actually, we call them beneficial because they're the natural pesticide in your landscape. But we say walk through, monitor regularly because you don't want it to get to a point where sometimes it gets completely infested, and then in some cases you have to get rid of the plant. So be friends with your plants, and that's what's part of an integrated pest management approach. Who knows what's the approved research-based way of dealing with aphids? So again, if you spot a pest and you think it's an aphid, Google, put UC in front of your Google search. Say University of California, aphid. You see rats, you see squirrels, you see ants, you see whatever you think it is, and that'll give you a list of, it'll tell you all about the pest so you can correctly identify it, and it'll give you a list of methods starting from the least toxic method, and if all of that fails, then it gives you a specific pesticide to use. And we say specific because we don't want to use a broad spectrum because it'll kill the beneficial insects that we're trying to encourage to do our work for us in the garden. And the number one recommendation to deal with aphids is a hose of water. Just put on the hose, rub them off with your fingers, and that's the recommendation, and it's usually pretty effective. So we encourage you to squash, trap, wash off or prune out affected plant parts, use mulch for weed control, and only use pesticides as a last resort. Any questions? So this is what I wanted to, I'll pass this around, but you all know, you're all familiar with lady beetles, right? But did you know how they look at various stages of their life cycle? So here, these little eggs and this little waspy looking thing, if you were to see that on a plant, you'd probably go straight for the spray. Seriously. See? What are those insect eggs on my plants? So get familiar with the various stages of these beneficial insects' life cycle so you know, do you want to protect them? Okay, and again, you can Google this, put UC, meet the beneficials, and you can get access to this research-based information. Okay, I already mentioned there's a UC, I know I'm getting the wind up. There's a UC pest note for that. That's what I mentioned earlier. If you have a problem, UC pest note, gophers. Skunks, and I said squirrels, but good luck with that. Okay.
There we go.
Oh, well, I was only a couple minutes late.
So we're going to take a quick break. We've provided refreshments. There's like fruit and veggies and nuts and cheese and crackers, all from the farmer's market. I just want to say that olives have seeds in them, so please don't crack a tooth on us. Please get some refreshments, go to the restroom, and we'll meet back in a bit for the second half of the presentation.
Good question.
There are talks specifically on design, and I think there's one that has a 3-part, but I'm going to try to get it done in this next 20 minutes. Okay.
Just start those. Start.
Okay. So, garden design, for me, garden design is an artistic form of self-expression, so you really can't go wrong. It should say something about you, a reflection of your personality. What does your garden say about you? A good friend of mine visited my garden in Pennsylvania, and she described it as diverse, interesting, and beautiful. And I like to think that was a reflection of me, you know, like diversity. That would have been nice. Okay, so first things first, and for me this is the not so fun part, but it's very important to do. You need to do a site analysis, take an inventory of what you actually have, right? This is called a baseline map. So what you have to do is map to scale, so that means measuring with, you know, a tape, and mapping on graph paper, existing structures and plants that you intend to keep. So fences, paving, trees, property lines, your house, your garage, all of that stuff. So put that on a map. Then consider your surroundings, the views that you want to maintain and the views that you want to hide. Say, you know, you want to hide your garbage bins, or you want to take advantage of the view you're getting of your neighbors. In my yard, I get a view of my neighbor's magnolia over the fence. So it makes my yard look bigger because I can see beyond my garden into hers, and it's like an extension. So if you look at your neighbor and see if there's anything you'd like to highlight there too, might as well. It's called the borrowed landscape. Okay, so the whole goal is to harmonize and have a graceful transition with the environment. So I mentioned before that I grow succulents and I love them, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to create this desert scene in my Menlo Park garden, because it just wouldn't fit in. We want to blend in with the environment. It's called a sense of place. Have you heard about that? And this is talked about so eloquently and presented in this book. If you guys get a chance to borrow this from the library, I highly recommend it. Okay, I've got to talk faster. And then consider the style. Did you want like a cottagey type of garden or a modern, traditional? Think about those things. Look at magazines, see what appeals to you. Take a walk in your neighborhood. It's likely that what's growing well in your neighbor's property will likely, but remember, grow well in your property as well. And then you have to track the sun. Remember we talked about giving a plant what it needs in terms of sun and, you know, conditions is going to be the best thing you can do to create gardening success. So you're not going to plant a hydrangea anymore, but if you were to, you shouldn't plant that in the sun because they like shade, right? So when you buy a plant, as much as you love it, read what it needs, and if you don't have that environment in your yard, please put it back. Okay, because you won't, the plant won't be happy, and therefore you won't be happy, and you'll waste money and time and all the rest of it. You got that? Okay. So there is a way to track the sun, and what we normally do is in the middle of summer, in the heat of the summer solstice, which is, I think it's June around 22nd, you see where the sun is on your yard in the middle of the day, and that's what's getting full sun. And of course in the winter the sun angle goes down, and in my yard, a place where I get full sun in the summer, I have absolutely no sun in the winter. So if you are wanting to plant a flowering plant that flowers in the winter, it's not going to be doing well in that shady part of the yard. There's also a website called Find My Shadow, and you can put in your latitude and longitude and actually map. If you can put where north is, you can actually map what the sun pattern is in your yard. And it's actually pretty cool and very important to the health of your plant. Find My Shadow. I should put that up there. Okay, and determine microclimates for people and plants. If you're going to be wanting to put a book reading area in your backyard, will you be putting that in full sun or under the shade of a tree? So think about the microclimates in your yard. If it's a windy spot, you're probably not going to put your, lounge chairs there. Okay. So once you figured out what you actually have in your yard, the next step is to figure out, well, what do I want? How do I want this landscape to function? Because usually it's about function, whether it's just for beauty or you actually want to sit out there, barbecue, entertain, all those kind of things. And you make a really long list. Most people make a really long list, and that would be me as well. So do you want to have a barbecue and living area, a secluded escape? Do you want to grow an edible vegetable garden? These are all the choices that you have to incorporate in your yard. I'm encouraging you to create a low maintenance and sustainable garden. That means creating permeable surfaces, so no big areas of solid concrete, for example, because the water doesn't penetrate and then it'll just run off into the street. So you might consider moderating the climate and plan for energy conservation and create shade and windbreaks. And what I mean by this is, if you look at this map, if you can see north here and south, if you plant tall deciduous trees on the west, on this side of your house, southwest part of your house, it'll actually shade your house from the hot afternoon sun in the summer. And that's going to be energy conservation for you. And if they're deciduous in the winter, they'll let the winter sun in. At the back here north, you want to create a windbreak because that's where the northerlies come in. So plant some evergreen plants to sort of block that wind from coming through. And it talks here about east, but I really don't encourage blocking the morning sun. I think the morning sun is the best sun we can get, so keep that open. Okay. So after you've created the baseline and you've created your wish list, you're going to have to prioritize, because our wish list is often much longer than what we can afford, what we have space for, and time for. So decide which are your important things you must have. Visualize outdoor rooms. And what you do is put tracing paper on top of the baseline and play with it. Figure out what makes sense in terms of, if I want a barbecue area, does it make sense for it to be close to my kitchen side door, back door, or does it make sense for it to be all the way, it's got to be functional. So when you're creating paths, make sure they lead to something. And consider the view from inside the house. I always am planting my favorite plant in front of my kitchen window. So when I'm doing the dishes, I get to enjoy looking at that. And use plants to serve a purpose, like we said, for energy conservation or to block a view, etc. I'm trying to rush through this. I'm sorry because we're running out of time. Anybody have questions? Okay. Okay, the fun part, choosing plants for function and beauty. So determine what the purpose of the plant that why do you need that plant? Is it for shade? Is it for background, hedge, screen, accent, as a focal point? Determine what the cultural needs are of the plant, because remember you want to give the plant exactly what it needs. Consider the mature size. Always know. Find out how big this plant will get, because you might think, oh, well, I can just keep cutting it back. But it actually gets very tiring doing all that work, and it gets expensive, because once it gets too big, you're going to have to hire somebody else to come in and prune that, trim that. I'm seeing heads nodding here. It's a very common, shall we say, mistake that we think we can do our own adaptation of the plants, Just plant the right plant in the right place, and there's going to be less work for you. So all these so the first thing you want to start with is planting the big things, like putting in your paving, putting in the big mature trees, right? Because they're the bones. They're the things you're less likely to change over a long period of time. They're going to be staying there. So put those in first. Decide on which big tree you want and where that's placed, what your paving and path's going to be. And then you can figure out next the shrubs, the medium size, and the little, the smaller things, they can come in like much later. So do it in that order will be easier for you to even sort of do it over time. Because, for example, a tree will take a lot longer to establish and become mature, so you want to get those in first. Say if your budget's limited, don't worry about the little things in the beginning. Put those trees in, give them time to grow, and gradually you can put the other things in. So that's the bones. Decide if you want seasonal interest. I'm really getting into edibles now, so I've got a few. Make sure to have blueberries or other fruit trees. And even if you don't choose natives, if you're choosing other types of plants, say for example roses, pick the disease-resistant varieties so you don't have to spray them and mollycoddle them. There are, in the Arboretum All-Stars collection, there are some roses recommended here, and they're recommended because of their disease resistance. So you don't have to worry about black spot and rust and all of that those things. And then space the plants according to their mature size. I know when you buy them, they're little 4-inch things, but some of those plants are going to get this big, and take that into consideration. I know I've mentioned that more than once already tonight, but it's very important. And use the plant selection tools that we talked about earlier. Okay. So I actually took some classes at the Art Institute of Seattle, and the first class was and I'm from a science background, and the first class was online. I'm like, a whole class and a whole week of projects online, what is this about? But line is like the basic, fundamental beginning to all design, because line leads the eye. It can be real, like between a lawn or a garden bed and a path. It can be imaginary, so that, if I'm following colors around the room, that creates a line if I'm following all the red in the room, for example, right? And it also directs, you can use line to direct the view to where you want it to go. Now form is just the shape of things. It can be pyramidal, global, all different shapes and sizes, and decide basically what appeals to you. Colour. So you all remember the colour wheel from school? Here it is. I actually got this from the Art Institute course. And you might remember that if you're choosing colours within the blues, it's going to give you a kind of more relaxed feeling. If you choose a monochromatic colour scheme, that means colours like all greens, all different shades of green, or beige is a popular one, like for interior design. A monochromatic color scheme is kind of like more peaceful and restful. And we all know what a red color scheme makes us feel. Who can tell me? Usually, what does red incite? Passion, excitement. But you don't want too much of it in your garden. Okay, so you may remember from school that about complementary colors. So the colors opposite each other on the color wheel, like red and green, or blue and orange, so they're completely opposite each other on the color wheel. They're called complements, and what they do is when they're put next to each other, they help intensify each of those colors. So the blue looks bluer, and the orange looks more orange. So I'll give you an example. Here's an orange plant in this orange pot. It's kind of cute because just the plant's cute, right? But it's in an orange pot, so it's like a monochromatic color scheme. But you think I would get a smaller pot, but yes, I planted it, the one at home. Okay, so if I put this in front of the blue, I hope you can see it here. Okay, so what are you seeing? You said, wow. So orange, kind of boring, sorry. But look what happens next to its complement. It makes the orange look more intense and the blue look more intense. So that's what I'm talking about. You can achieve a lot with color in your garden. You all see that? I've got to hurry up here. Okay, so texture is how light reflects off an object. So it's like how it feels. I've got to really rush through these so we can quickly do the other things. And contrast can be accomplished in a number of ways. And by, the contrast of complementary colors, the contrast in textures, so something shiny and large versus something, like this. This is kind of like thicker and finer, and you can create interest by having these things next to one another. So if you had a whole hedge of the same thing, to get interest, you could put something different in front of it, and your eye would go there immediately. So that's repetition is very necessary in a garden, and it can be, because I'm getting all nervous because I'm conscious of the time. Yeah, so repetition leads the eye. So if we put the same object, I'm trying to look here, if we had red in the room and you're wearing a red shirt, and then my eye, because you're different than your surroundings, you're contrasting your surroundings, you become a focal point. You're the first thing you look at when you come in the room, because you're different than the surroundings. It's a contrast. And then my eye, the repetition of red, my eye has this natural tendency to follow the next red thing in the room. So in that way, in your landscape, if you repeat a color or a form or a plant or a texture, it leads the eye around your landscape, which is what you want to do. You don't want it to get stuck on that one red thing or that one focal point. You want to enjoy the whole space.
Don't feel rushed, but we're going to start doing these since everyone's sitting.
Okay.
So if you need a pen, this will be your ticket to the raffle. And then this will be better since the second part is up out of your seat.
Okay. So the balance is the proportion of plants relative to the surroundings. It's hard to do. Okay, so if we get all of those things right above, it creates unity in the garden. And that's what you want to accomplish, that it's one whole, but it has individual parts that come together in a balanced form. Does anybody have any questions on that? We can ask them at the end. Okay. Okay, this is a very simple example of these elements and principles that we just talked about. So what do you see here from the list of items? Do you see repetition? So you see balance. So all the pots are the same, so there's repetition. You see balance because they're sort of like balancing each other. Do you see a focal point?
No color.
So without color, we still have a focal point, which is the round one. So we're creating a focal point through form, just the form. You see, imagine if this one was the same plant. It'd be pretty boring. And just that simple change in contrast in form creates a focal point. And there's also some repetition here with this, this dark here with the arrangement in the back. And consider that as, say, for example, if it was, part of your house. It's got to blend in with your house as well. Okay, so what would be the focal point here? That's pretty easy. Okay, the agave. Okay, so in this one, we're illustrating repetition. And this repetition of red, it doesn't have to be the same plant, but it's the same color. We have a line here of trees. Here we have a color, this is in my yard, a color complements, orange, yellow, and purple. That makes it kind of like stand out and be very bright. And this path here creates the line, and I don't know about you, but looking at this picture, I want to follow that path and see what's around the corner. Yes? You agree? This is a California native Matilda poppy right here. And this is a very interesting play on textures and form as well. There's another color complement contrast there. Texture play. And these are on the list if you pick up my handout at the back. Some drought-tolerant gardens to visit if you want to see a lot of these plants in their kind of like natural habitat. At Berkeley, at the San Francisco Botanic Garden, and at the University of California, Santa Cruz Arboretum. Okay, in summary, a beautiful garden can also be water efficient and low maintenance if you choose your plants that are adapted to your climate and microclimate, if you nurture your soil, if you water correctly, if you use sustainable landscape practices, and apply the design elements and principles. And if you do all that, you get to sit back, relax, put your feet up and enjoy. Okay, thank you to the Bosca and the Alameda County Water District. And then we can do a quick demo, can we?
Yeah.
Okay, so who wants to learn how to plant a plant properly?
Yes.
Come up. We're going to pretend this is soil. I mean, it is soil, but...
So just a quick note on the surveys. Be sure to write your name or something that you know would identify you as your survey is called. Forgot to mention that.
So I have plants for giveaways and also some of my favorite gardening gloves. You can get these on Amazon, but you can actually feel through these. You know how sometimes gloves, you just want to take them off because you can't feel what you're doing? And you can throw them in the wash. Yeah. Okay, when you're done with that, come up and I'll show you what to do. Huh? Oh, can you come here for a second? No. But they did tape it, so. Oh, can you come here for a second? Which one do you want me to show you how to plant? So this is one of the wonderful plants in the Arboretum All-Stars. It looks you're wondering why I'm saying it's wonderful. In the spring, you see evidence here. This is Belle Etoile right here. The fragrance. I brought it to a talk once. They're not in flower yet, and everybody wanted to buy this plant. The fragrance is like the best fragrance you could imagine in a plant, and I think it's probably like, trust me, it's wonderful, and it lasts at least 2 months in the garden in flower. So, and it's a beautiful white flower, Philadelphus Belle Etoile. So I can show you how to plant this, and we might be able to divide it. So what you would do, here's your plant. What you want to do is water this thoroughly ahead of time, which I did. So ideally you would put it in a bucket of water, right, submerge it, and what you'll see is all these air bubbles will come up, and when the air bubbles stop coming up, that means all those air bubbles are filled with water, and that's when you know you've thoroughly watered it, right? So then let it sit for a bit to let it drain, and then you want to support the plant, tip it upside down. You might need to squeeze it a little bit. And for natives, it's actually better to plant smaller plants, because once they're in pots for a long time and they get bigger and bigger, they tend to get start curling in the plant, and then they'll never really venture out. So try to avoid the curling. Well, it's a little different than root bound. They're actually curling in on themselves. The root bound is when this is completely full of roots, and this isn't. This actually looks pretty good, but if it was circling, you'd want to separate them. But with California natives, you don't want to touch the roots, okay?
Why is that?
They don't like it. I know, it's like, so if it was circling, I would loosen this, right? But you don't do that with California natives. Okay, so you want to, with all plantings, you want to dig the hole at least twice as wide as the root ball, but no deeper than the root ball. So, yes? So, pretend I have a shovel. So why do you think we don't want to go any deeper than the root ball?
The plant will sink down and the roots, I mean the stem will rot because it's covering the, what it's called.
You want the roots to go out.
No,
You're
I mean,
all
if you
correct.
sink it down at the trunk,
You're
the
all
trunk
correct.
will rot because you got the dirt around it, all that moisture. So the trunk will rot.
Correct. So remember when we said about watering, we want to water at the drip line and not around the trunk or the crown, because the crown will rot if you water it there. So if you did plant it dug it too deep, the tendency is after you've planted this and it settles, it's likely to go below grade. So you actually want to plant this about 1 inch above grade. So again, I'm supporting. Never pick up a plant. I've seen them do it at the nursery. In this case, you would want to loosen the roots a little bit. Sometimes with some plants, not natives, I actually cut through if they're really root bound, which I shouldn't have bought it. You know, don't be afraid. Like if you sit at the nursery and you see roots coming out the bottom, don't be afraid to tip it upside down and take a look. And if those roots are all circling, don't get it. It'll be a difficult start and never really get to its full potential. So about 1 inch, keep it solid at the bottom. And if you look at that picture, this is a UC Arboretum All-Stars diagram of planting. You want to spread the roots. You want the roots to go down and out. So sometimes when you take these out of the container, the roots will get detangled. So try to spread them out if that happens. Okay? So twice as wide, so it's easy for the plant to spread out into the new soil. If this was in the ground, you'd want to rough up the edges so the roots have something to grab onto. And then just put the soil back and just tamp down, only tamp down the new soil. You don't want to put a lot of pressure on the roots. It's like I ended up with less soil than I started with. What happened here? Okay, so you see it's a little higher than what we started with. And then you want to create a berm at the edge of the pot, like a watering basin. Okay? Oh, I forgot to mention, for California natives, and you can do this with other plants too, once you've dug the hole, fill it with water and let it drain through, and that will serve as a reservoir for the plant. They can. Do you suggest to put B1 in that water? Did you put in the hole or no? No, the only thing I would recommend to put in, if not for natives, they're a little different, you could combine some compost with the native soil if you were planting some other,
But only a tiny bit, not like I've seen people fill the whole pot, a whole little bit.
Yeah, don't do that, because what happens with that, if you put too nice soil around this root ball, it's going to stay there. It's going to say, oh, this is really nice. I don't want to go out there, right? So in fact, they say when you're planting trees, all types of trees, do not amend the soil, because you want those roots to reach out into the soil, because that's your soil. That's why we're going to pick the plants that like your place, right? Your climate, your soil type. Okay.
Your soil is really clay-like. I have really clay-like soil. It seems like I need to add something to it, otherwise it's just,
Well, you would go to the Calscape and pick plants for your region and for clay soil, right? If you're, planting traditional plants that we're not supposed to plant anymore because they need more water, then we traditionally add compost to that to lighten it. But you don't, as I said, you don't want to do that just in the immediate vicinity, and you want to make sure to put compost on top, so you're building up the soil, that growing layer that we talked about. Add compost every year to the top of your garden, and then mulch on top of it, and then eventually your soil will see some improvement in that top growing layer. Okay, so you've let the water drain, you've planted your plant, then you create this watering basin, you fill it with water, right? Completely soak it. It'll be easy to water because, you've just opened up this soil. And then for natives, we're going to do this. We're going to put it back. And then for a native, you're going to, we say they're drought tolerant. All these drought tolerant plants, they are drought tolerant once they're established. But in the first 1 to 2 growing seasons, they need care. So if you're planting this in the middle of summer, which I highly recommend you don't, here's the reason. Remember we talked about all the drought tolerant strategies? They don't grow in the summer. The drought tolerant plants do not grow in the summer because you need water to do that, and they've adapted to not need water so they don't grow. That's their strategy, right? So if you plan to plant in the middle of summer that is literally dormant throughout the whole summer, it's just going to sit there and not do anything. That's why we recommend planting in the fall, because then the fall rains, and also in the spring is okay too, because they're still growing. So then you're going to want to mulch it. So for natives, you're going to want to use bark, organic materials. That for example, succulents, you want to use inorganic materials like rocks, things like that. So the watering schedule. If it's really hot, again, you're going to want to, you never want to let the root ball dry out on a newly establishing plant, right? It's not going to be, it's going to take longer to establish. So you're going to have to go out there and check on it. And you might need to water it every other day, depending on the weather. But then, next season, after a few weeks, you can reduce it to once a week instead of every other day. But you've got to, pay attention, check the soil, see how the plant's doing. And then by next season, you should be able to only have to water once a month in the dry season. And then the following season, you should be good to go for natives. Okay, quick pruning. No?
Do it really quick.
Really quick. Does anybody want to learn how to prune?
Yeah.
Okay. I love doing this part. Okay, diamond file. Okay, you want to use clean, sharp tools. Blunt tools, imagine if you're having surgery. You don't want a blunt knife cutting your skin because it doesn't heal well. The same applies to plants. So when you're pruning a plant, you're wounding it. You're cutting a piece of it off. And you're also removing the photosynthetic material because you're cutting off a branch that has leaves. So it's not able to photosynthesize as much as it could before. So you want to minimize pruning. And mostly we want to prune to remove dead branches, any branches that are coming into the plant or crossing or rubbing because they wound one another. So that's the minimum you should do. And if you haven't planted the wrong plant in the wrong place, you're not going to have to reduce it so much. But if you do, I've got to get this. Be quick. Okay. First, if you want to know how to sharpen your instrument, see there's the sharp edge and then there's the flat. This is called the bypass pruner. You need to have a really good one of these. The Felcos are very popular, but I like this CRS because you lock it and you just click it open. It's really handy when you're doing a lot of work. You just, whereas this one you have to, I got these at CRS. Get it from the A.M. Leonard catalogue. Oh my gosh, if you like gardening tools, don't get that catalogue. You'll end up very poor. But this is a wonderful tool, ARS Corporation. Okay, so diamond file, the rough edge, like a nail file, it's got the rough edge, and you want to file it in the same angle as the actual blade, right? So you do this like 6 times along the blade. And what you'll get is a spur. You want to feel that spur, just be careful. See how we created a spur? Anyone else want to feel it? Okay. So we don't want that spur. So we're going to get the smooth end. We're going to do that flat. Get rid of that. And actually I should have done the smooth end here. Okay, we're ready to go. And this should be able to cut paper. That's how you know you've been successful. In between cuts, you want to spray. You can either soak in rubbing alcohol, but I find this a lot easier. Lysol.
Really?
So clean this. I use, dishwashing liquid. So it's got to be clean before the spray will work, because otherwise if there's dirt on it, this is not really penetrating. Especially if you are cutting off a diseased branch, you want to make sure you sterilize your tools because you don't want to transfer that. Because once you cut a plant, you're exposing its insides to. Okay, so you can direct the direction of growth on a plant. Okay, so here, plants grow from the apical tip. This was the tip. The apical tip means it grows upward from the top. Okay, have you ever tip pruned fuchsias to make them bushier? So all the energy, all the actual plant hormones go upward. If I were to cut this, it tells the hormones to go here. And that means I'll end up getting 2 branches instead of 1. So if I want to make something bushier, I cut the tips off. It's called tip pruning, and instead of 1, there'll be 2 coming out from the center here. Okay, if this is in front of my, which I have a lot of plants walking to my door. We have to do the jungle jive to get to my door. So you want to direct the plant growth. So say that's my path, or I shouldn't say that. Okay, so I don't want it going into the plant or into wherever I don't want it to go. So I'm going to cut in the direction that I want the growth to be. So if I cut here, we're going to get growth here and here. See how these are alternate? They're this way and then that way. I don't want it to go that way, but you can choose which direction, and it's going to be usually outward. You don't want it growing into the inside of the plant because it limits air circulation, which is bad. Then you get the rubbing and the crossing, all of that thing. So that's how you can prune. Now, actual pruning, when you make a cut, okay, so let's look at this licodendron. Okay. Say I'm cutting this bud. I want the bud to grow this way. Okay? So I'm going to cut at a 45-degree angle. Not more, not less. And it's got to be, my top of it is got to be level with that node. Not higher, not lower. If I cut, I wish I brought a rose, but if I cut too high, see, again, this is because of the healing hormones in the plant. They're like in a tree, they're at the branch bark ridge, the branch collar. So have you seen people, oh, this drives me crazy, when I drive around and I see poorly cut trees, you've got I've got a picture of it, but no, my husband said no. Okay, so there's the branch, right? This is the branch, it's connected here to the tree, okay? You see often, people just cut it here. But there's no healing hormones there. Have you seen that with roses? People cut their roses too high. And then what happens over time is that just rots away, right? This is where the healing hormone is, at the branch. There's actually hormones that heal and you form a nice callus. So that's how the position that you need to cut. You need to make a 45-degree angle cut at the level of see how that's level with that? It's 45-degree angle. That's how you want to cut all your roses, your camellias. Say you've got camellias and they're starting to grow now. You want to make sure you cut it where you want the direction of the growth to go. What else? And when you're cutting a plant, never reduce it more than 25%. Don't go crazy, guys. Okay, I'm getting we're over time.
Thank you so much. I feel like we could be here all night with the wealth
I know.
you have. We get her going.
And I want to share everything.
A round of applause. Thank you so much.
So how are we going to do this?
Yeah, I'll be collecting the surveys and Haley
Okay.
will be making sure you have your indicator on there, that your name or something else.
How many people did you say?
There was 28.
Oh, okay, too bad, I won't have enough.
So will this start by itself?
You feel free to take it, but it'll take a very long time. Yeah. Thank you, John.
These are beautiful. My neighbor
I
has
could-
all kinds of these.
So this plant I brought I did this talk here in the first talk of the season last year was March, and it's been in flower since then. I've literally bought it in flower every talk that I've done from spring through fall. It's been in flower for 12 months. This is a Grevillea, Australian native, and it's that one has been in this vase for at least a month. It still looks pretty good.
I can keep it in water and then move it to like sand, right? To try to start the root space in the little pot.
Maybe Pacita, you can stay around for a bit after,
Yeah.
since we got to get this wrapped up. This building's closing.
On sticky
The
monster?
first person that can pick their plant is Robin Marr.
No, it's me.
So you can pick a plant or you can pick a pair of gloves.
The second choice is Shelby.
Oh, good choice.
So you said this is the beautiful smelling one.
Oh, yes.
All right.
Oh, yes.
Next winner is
It's from
Ann
cutting.
Taylor.
But even this
So I just get to pick a plant?
Yep, or garden gloves.
I'll take this.
Australian native kangaroo paw.
Everyone gets them. Carol Hatcher.
I might divide this one because there's not enough for everyone. Is that okay? I got all the plants from Half Moon Bay Nursery in Half Moon Bay. I'm going to divide this because there aren't enough plants for everyone. So, and I want at least...
Next one is Ed. Lucia.
Can you put the little one in here?
Oops. Yes, I want some soil in there. So this make sure you water it when you get home. Because this one doesn't like to be too dry. No. Yeah, that's my. But you know what? You want a cutting of it? That's my display thing I use all the time.
You're in a different climate.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You're wonderful.
Oh, thank
If
you.
you're a winner, make sure you have your plants so we know how many more are left. Has everyone grabbed theirs? Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4.
We have gloves.
It doesn't say the name. The next person is
That's a kangaroo
Annie.
paw.
Can you remember that?
Kangaroo paw.
Is Annie still here?
P-A-W.
All right.
Like a paw.
Following Annie is Jeremy Mack.
I can divide this actually as well. This is, I hate saying that name. Achillea.
That's Yarrow?
Yarrow.
Yarrow, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to divide this so there's more plants for everyone.
Are these all available as well?
Yes. And I've got extra large for 2 men if they choose that.
It's beautiful. It's pink grapes. Dawn Surratt. Nice.
What happened here?
Yeah, I like that too. That's oh, the Yana.
Jeboy. Nice.
I'm take a pair of gloves.
Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome. Enjoy.
Does this one do,
Christine Mack.
Just typing it, yeah. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know that you can get the tape off because it's going to be so
Yep.
long, but I think you'll have access
These
to the
come in lots of
website.
different colours.
The lady to
Like
see
yellow,
Megan
white.
One
over there
plant
should be
left.
in charge.
No, all gloves.
The one that's holding.
No, I'm cutting these plants down. I've got more.
everybody wants to play with
I'm actually
Yes,
surprised.
it'll be
but
probably on the
anyway.
website.
So who
on
hasn't
their
gotten a
website,
prize
on the
yet?
Waterboard website.
Here's another plant.
Still got a few.
So these ones that I've divided,
Oh yeah, the design.
make sure you water them when they get home. Because, you know, I'm cutting their roots. They need some care. Oh, that's the fragrant one. Yeah. And that's on the Arboretum All-Stars list. So if you Google that, yeah. Oh yeah, it's pretty easy. It takes part sun as well. It's deciduous.
Sashi. David, why?
This is Loropetalum. They're pretty hardy. And this is a California native. I feel sad that I cut it just before it was blooming.
All right, has everyone gotten their prize that's been called?
Excuse me, ma'am.
Roger.
Onto this in here, and then I took a little bit. Can you tell me what it is, please?
Yeah, it's this.
Can I take this?
Yeah, no one else wants it.
Okay, thank you.
Ken Cleary.
Oh, no, I wasn't asking you to do anything.
Oh no, but I want to.
All right, get
Thank
some
you.
gloves.
Because you probably won't do it tonight.
She did say there's
Oh,
2
thank you for
extra
coming.
large men's if needed.
Yeah,
So much.
there you go.
Thank you.
The sooner you can get these in the ground, the better, actually. But wait till it's not as soggy.
Ray.
These are the extra large men's.
Now who hasn't got a prize?
Oh,
1,
no.
2, 3, 4 people?
Oh, there's lots of gloves.
Yeah, come on and grab some gloves.
This is a Grevillea. G-R-E. It's an Australian native. And this,
But we can grow it.
yes,
Based on your map, yeah.
yes. In fact, this one is a plant from my garden, and it's been flowering all year.
Is it really big? Does it get really big?
Yeah, it gets about this big. But it's airy. It's airy, so it doesn't take up a lot of visual space, you know what I mean?
Is it a sun plant? Or
Yes.
What is that one called?
G-R-E, Grevillea. Grevillea. E. G-R-E. Villia. And this is one is called Peaches and Cream. And I got this one at Golden Nursery in Golden Nursery. It's in San Mateo. They're kind of expensive, but they have a lot of nice Australian natives there.
Oh.
That's why I missed it.
Yeah.
And this is ARS.
ARS.
And where, what's the catalog?
Yeah. A.M. Leonard.
Pull it out.
Leonard. Leonard. Oh, I didn't bring my saw knife. They have saw knives. They have...
All kinds of good. I see here that you trained it, so
Oh, that was
you
the...
trimmed it above the node on the direction you want to go. Is that
Correct. If I wanted it to go this way, see, that's where the new growth would come from, right there. If I wanted it to go that way, then I would cut it there. And the cut is,
Yeah, it was 20
it's probably,
45 degrees.
yeah.
That was nice.
But also, yeah,
At the level of this guy.
yeah. It's harder with these, like with rose, it's a lot easier to do the exact at the horizontal line as well.
This is really different.
Yeah, leucodendron. Yep.
They're all different.
Yeah, and these are all drought tolerant. And you can get all this color from,
Yeah, it takes a little
and
bit
this
of
you can see
processing.
is just about to flower, and it's actually purpley pink. Oh, it's gorgeous. And the foliage is fragrant. It's like minty. It's actually Australian too. I have a bias, I think.
Send it to her before I send it out.
Now, do you have to cut it at, I mean, I cut it at a certain angle. Are you supposed to cut it at a certain angle?
Exactly what I told you. The 40.
Okay.
When I cut these off today,
Mm-hmm.
I care more about what I'm leaving behind because that's my plant. For the
Sure.
vase, it's okay. So
Yeah.
I made sure I cut it at the angle that I wanted it to grow. It's 45-degree angle, pretty much always.
Oh, okay, okay.
And so I'm cutting the branch so the new growth will go that way, out, where I want it to go, not in.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Like this one is pointing out, it will
Mhm.
grow that way. If you point that side, it will go that
Mhm. It'll come out of there.
Oh,
If I want it to go this way, it'll comes out of that